Nations that Part 2 will enact, sir.
Mr Chairman.
Call Dennis O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. New Zealand First supports this bill wholeheartedly. We think it's a very good piece of legislation. Indeed, we think it's high time that this country had it. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the work of the ministers involved and the regulations review committees, past and present, and also, of course, of the officials who've been involved in producing this very good piece of legislation. And for me, I think that the improvements it will make to public access and what I call understandability and what's called navigability in the regulatory impact statement are the most important aspects of the bill. And I can tell you this, Mr Chairman, that when I was admitted to the bar in 1972, things were a lot more difficult for people then when they tried to navigate their way through legislation. And I remember staggering into courtrooms with arms full of statutes or regulations in case I had to refer to some obscure part of one of them and track my way through various amendments. So Phil Goff's reference to dusty volumes were very real for me in those days, but of course things have much improved, and this particular bill is going to make things better still. And I think accessibility and understandability, not just for judges and lawyers, but particularly for the public, is what I particularly like about this piece of legislation. And it is a very important legislation, dull though it may be to many people, because it does govern the drafting of legislation in this country, and it concerns, of course, also some new roles for the definitions of roles, rather, for the Parliamentary Council. Principally, it will be replacing the Statutes Drafting and Compilation Act 1920, which is an old and rather out-of-date piece of legislation, and the Acts and Regulations Publication Act 1989 and the Regulations Disallowance Act 1989. But more importantly still, it will be the program for a three-yearly review on a systematic basis of New Zealand legislation. And I think that's extremely important as well. I do think also that the functions of the Chief Parliamentary Council in ensuring that legislation will be published in electronic as well as printed form are equally important, and that he will be able to issue official versions in electronic as well as printed form are also important. I do, however, particularly want to refer to something that is stated in the regulatory impact statement, and I quote, when giving an example of why it's important for people to be able to navigate their way through legislation. It says, quote, "For example, the law on one topic can be scattered, with provisions sometimes hidden in unlikely statutes, and acts are amended many times before they are replaced. This can lead to inconsistencies with obsolete and redundant provisions remaining in force," unquote. And those are exactly the sorts of problems which this bill addresses, and why New Zealand First is so happy to support the bill. I did want to refer especially to sections 31 and 33, because I think that these are the most important parts of the bill as a whole. And the most important part of all is section 29.2, which sets out the purpose, which is the revision is to reenact in an up-to-date and accessible form the law previously contained in all or part of one or more acts, but except as authorised by the subpart. Revision is not intended to change the effect of a law, and that is the crux of the whole thing, I believe. I also note that in section 33A, it says in subsection 1, a revision bill as introduced must not contain any proposed change to the effect of the law unless the amendment is authorised by section 31. So that's repeated there again. And I note with some pleasure also the requirements for certification in section 33, which I think is a very valuable safeguard. However, if I was to express any concerns at all, and I must say that they're not great concerns, then I would have, Mr. Chairman,
Dennis O'Rourke.
I would have to refer to section 31, where it does provide for the revision powers, and it particularly refers to some, I think, important items in subsection 2, where it states a revision bill may A, revise the whole or part of one or more acts, and for that purpose combine or divide acts or parts of acts. I don't think that's likely to cause any difficulty with regard to the requirement not to change the law. However, if you look in F of that subsection, it does state that it is possible to include new or additional purpose provisions, outline or overview provisions, examples, diagrams and so on. So actually that does make it possible for some change in the substance of the law to be introduced. However, with the certification provisions, I think the risk of that is minor. The greatest risks, if there are any, of course, are in I and J of that particular subsection. And I says that it is possible to make minor amendments to clarify Parliament's intent. The problem is, of course, we will never really know what the words minor mean, and clarifying Parliament's intent can be a lot more difficult than the words, as stated, might on the surface mean. And in J, it refers to updating any monetary amount and so on, those sorts of things. So there is some scope for a change to the substance of the law to be introduced as part of a revision bill. However, I think care has been taken in the bill as a whole to make sure that that will not happen, especially the certification provisions, and indeed subsection 3 of section 31 states quite explicitly a revision bill must not change the effect of a law except as authorised by subsection 2I or J, which are the very ones I referred to, under which such a change is possible. But I think the safeguards are quite sufficient, and New Zealand First, for that reason, is very satisfied with the bill as it stands. We believe that it will result in legislation being regularly updated, that it will be much more understandable or navigable, as it says in the regulatory impact statement, and certainly from the public's point of view will be much, much more accessible. For all of those reasons, Mr. Chairman, New Zealand First will be very happy to support the bill as amended at this stage.
To speak on this part of the